The quote you see on screen is taken from the back of Tell Me No Lies, an edited collection of investigative journalism that has stood the test of time. This old, well-worn book is something I've kept returning to over the years since I first borrowed it from my dad as a teenager because it captures the essence of real, authentic journalism, the great legal and often personal risks in holding the corrupt to account, and the timeless importance of truth and justice. Some of the works include The Atomic Plague by Wilfred Burchett, the first correspondent to enter Hiroshima following the bomb. From the opening line, "I write this as a warning to the world," he exposed the deadly realities of radiation that, had it not slipped past American censors, the world wouldn't have known. There is Martha Gellhorn's first-hand account of the liberation of Dachau, Seymour Hersh's expose on the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, John Pelger's Year Zero in Cambodia following the fall of the Khmer Rouge, as the country was abandoned by the United Nations because it just so happened to be liberated by the communist Vietnamese, and the West continued to recognize Pol Pot as the rightful leader for more than a decade after. Robert Fisk's haunting account of the Sabra and Shatila massacres, where hundreds of the elderly, women and children were brutally murdered by Christian and Israeli militia, and Paul Foot's tireless reporting on the Great Lockerbie whitewash. Whether you or I view these articles as politically advantageous or validating is besides the point, but when anyone talks about journalism, this is what really matters. There is a timeless quality to every single one of these articles, and the people behind them were so incredibly brave. They put themselves, their own health, their very life at risk. This is why I feel such great personal disgust at anyone who claims to be a games journalist or operating with any kind of journalistic integrity, because the people we're about to cover are the very antithesis of investigative reporters, to the point they don't even deserve to be in the same room. The following video is my best attempt to explain the deep, morally and ethically corrupt grift that passes as games media today, and expose the many so-called journalists that use it as a springboard for cynical self-interest. From Kotaku to IGN to the Mary Sue to the Daily Wire to e-girls begging for attention, what passes for journalism in the age of social media is a shallow imitation of the word, and why I have and always will refer to it as media. This is by no means comprehensive because I couldn't possibly cite every single example, go down every little rabbit hole without the video being a million hours long. To preempt some very likely and lazy criticism, I am not and have never claimed to be a journalist myself either. I also will not be going into GamerGate specifically, other than possibly touching on it briefly where relevant, because there are countless documentaries about that by now, and I don't feel like trying to untangle it. Everything that could have possibly been said about that whole thing already has. Suffice to say, whatever the movement became, the behavior of certain people, and whichever side was right or won, Zoe Quinn did sleep with Nathan Grayson. They were at least friends for years before this, where he failed to disclose the conflict of interest in reporting on her games, and a then completely unknown Anita Sarkeesian used this period as a platform to make a lot of money through Kickstarter. These are undisputed facts. I will also not be delving into review culture per se, or particularly infamous examples, unless it's directly relevant. This is because it's difficult to judge subjective opinion about whether someone really likes a game or not. Ultimately, everyone's opinion is worth as much as anyone else's because of the whole psychological effect of weighting with arbitrary numbers, but like I said, I'm not getting into that. Cases where reviews are cited, this will be less about the game itself or a particular score, and more to highlight certain behaviors or industry practices. There is no such thing as games journalism. Now, it's time to show you why. Last year, Robert Bertie Purchase, an associate editor for Eurogamer, gave a 5-star review to Dragon Age the Veilguard. IGN similarly gave it a 9 out of 10, and various outlets and sponsored YouTubers described it as a, quote, return to form. In concluding the review, Purchase described it as the following: epic in a way I think will set a high bar not only for Bioware in years to come, but for role-playing games in general general. This is among the very best of them. It is the strongest and loudest answer BioWare could have mustered for the people still doubting whether they could do it. The answer is yes, emphatically. The Veilguard is spectacular. BioWare is back. Note the disclaimer at the bottom that a review copy was provided by EA prior to release. On October 31st, 2025, Purchase returned to this initial review and has now retracted his emphatic praise of the game. In the article, he explains, including an interview with a colleague from a separate website called VG247, that he is not happy with giving it 5 stars at the time, and does not, in fact, think it is BioWare's best game. It is interesting he has come to this conclusion long after the review cycle has passed, and the access journalism he was afforded through the free copy provided by EA was used to boost sales even slightly, but he recognizes that he made a mistake. Another thing to note is that last year, IGN bought out Eurogamer, Game Informer, GamesIndustry.biz, VG247, and more. This is worth keeping in mind for what we'll cover next. In his review of Alien Isolation in 2014, Ryan McCaffrey, an editor for IGN, gave the game a 5.9 out of 10, citing that the game was too long, the AI was frustrating, and the fear factor was lost as a result. Note that the article contains promotional footage for the game about how scary it was, which features then IGN staff member Naomi Kyle. On the game's 10th anniversary in October 2024, just before a sequel was announced by developer Creative Assembly, another reviewer at IGN, Matthew Perslow, re-evaluated the game and that it was, in fact, brilliant, far more than his contemporaries evaluated it at the time. In his article, he states, "Understandably, there's a lot of upset among those fans over its disappointing sales that led to a lack of a sequel. Some like to blame IGN for that, but we certainly don't have anywhere near that much power. The reality likely is that Alien Isolation being an incredibly challenging stealth horror game, a niche with a limited audience. The video of McCaffrey's original review on YouTube has over 1.4 million views." I could continue citing examples, senior staff members at The Gamer and Game Informer praising Mass Effect Andromeda as better than people remember it was at release, the infamous firing of Jeff Gerstmann by GameSpot following a negative review score of 6 out of 10 for Kanan Lynch. GameSpot believed the 6.0 was unfair, the review's audio was deemed inferior due to microphone quality, there was limited footage that did not accurately represent the game, and ultimately refused to elaborate on the exact reasons for his dismissal. GameSpot's website had been covered with ads for the game at the time, and Gerstmann himself confirmed the reason for his firing in interviews years later. Kotaku's initial praising of Anthem, and then again, and then panning it at release, and then mourning the servers getting shut down. Many outlets, such as IGN and Polygon, heavily criticizing No Man's Sky at release in 2016, and now hailing it as significantly better. The list goes on. Admittedly, this section of the video is probably the weakest and the part I care the least about. The point, which should hopefully be obvious by now, is twofold. First of all, games are subject to hype and then later re-evaluated once the review period has passed, or to further highlight this contradiction, panned at release, and then re-evaluated later on as better than they were. A double dip, if you will. First of all, hype is worth a whole discussion just on its own. Given that these outlets operate solely through ad revenue, either through videos on YouTube or written articles on their respective websites, whatever editorial process is involved, these companies are the same as any other. They need to make money. Even the most well-intentioned editor in the world will not be employed for long if they can't drum up headlines that people want to hear. This is what gets attention. It's human nature, and, more often than not, driven by negativity. Let me pose a question to you. By your initial reaction, what would you like to hear about more? A brief 200-word article about some new portraits an indie developer has just added in an update, or a 1,000-word article detailing abusive practices in AAA studios? If you're excited for an upcoming release, what would you like to hear hear about more, a middling 7 out of 10 shrug of a review, or a glowing recommendation that this is one of the best games of the year and a return to form. If the game's really bad, you don't just get the review, you get the podcast, the breakdown, minute-to-minute reporting of what's happening behind the scenes, welcoming or condemnation of the tiniest patch. Major releases are the lifeblood of games media, and a gift that keeps on giving. The problem isn't with individual people changing their opinion. As mentioned earlier, you're welcome to change your mind. We all do it. The problem is that these outlets evidently go where the ad revenue and the money is. This can be extremely damaging to a game's reputation, such as in the case of Alien Isolation, or it can highlight a lack of integrity that these outlets don't have any real stance to begin with. Was Dragon Age the Veilguard a return to form, or the worst thing ever? Was Geoff in breach of his role as an editor and reviewer to be so dishonest about a game whose publisher had been pumping money into GameSpot's website? Review culture is a can of worms that I won't get into here. Frankly, I don't care. Most people just want media to tell them what they want to hear, rather than genuine critique, but this is the tip of the iceberg. Whether or not you like a game, movie, album, book, or 2-in-1 Segway Army knife off Amazon, these are purely subjective. While potentially a byproduct of more insidious practices, hype and reviews is just the start, because it only gets worse from here. Before we continue, let's briefly touch on the whole give and take of review copies, pre-release features, and the nature of the media cycle. There is no rule written down anywhere that any developer or publisher has to provide a key to anyone. This is an assumption, a given, that primarily big AAA releases will at least provide codes to major outlets such as PC Gamer, IGN, or GameSpot to either help boost pre-orders just before release or incentivize players to check the game out. Similarly, there is nothing set in stone around embargoes. It is not unheard of for keys to be given out as usual, but the publisher requires that only footage early on in a game, or what they provided, is shown to avoid spoilers. Cyberpunk 2077 infamously provided console B-roll that was not representative of the final product.
Reviewers were told that no console code would be made available and that we were only allowed to review the game on PC.
It is also not uncommon for embargoes to go right up until the day of release, such as in the case of the Callisto Protocol. So why does any of this matter? The give and take, as mentioned earlier, relies on a mutually beneficial exchange. In providing keys to media outlets or YouTubers, the publisher is relying on word of mouth and banking on a positive reception to build up hype and, therefore, sales. For the reviewer, posting their thoughts in written or video format will get eyes on their page and thus ad revenue, subscribers, followers, and so forth. Simply put, both sides are in it for profit. The opinion or score itself is secondary. Publishers are companies and exist to make money. It's not really relevant to this video whether they're consumer friendly or not. Another infamous example was ZeniMax refusing review codes of Starfield to most UK outlets as a petty act of revenge after the Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA for short, raised concerns around Bethesda's parent company, Microsoft, during their acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Instead, let's come back to the reviewer and media side of things, and how they benefit from giving particular results. IGN First is an exclusive hands-on series where the developer provides gameplay footage or previews that no other outlet has access to. This is, quite literally, access journalism, given that IGN is the most popular and farthest-reaching games media outlet in the world, with their YouTube channel standing at nearly 20 million subscribers. Every single one of them, then, is a potential buyer. As one example of how IGN First works, earlier this year, Ryan McCaffrey detailed his thoughts after a 3-hour preview with Mafia: The Old Country. His thoughts were overwhelmingly positive, citing that he didn't mind its shorter length, and the gameplay and story were engaging. He also described it as, quote, back to a Mafia 1 and 2 vibe again, end quote. This was following 9 minutes of gameplay that had been provided to IGN exclusively the previous week. In the final review, not by McCaffrey, but another staff member, Luke Riley, IGN gave the game an 8 out of 10, saying that while it doesn't reinvent the wheel in terms of its third-person gameplay, the vocal performance and story sold the experience. Despite often being criticized for its safe, fence-sitting review scores, IGN has, on occasion, given major game releases significant criticism. The new Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 was a 4 out of 10, and MW2 was 6 out of 10. However, these are often the exception, and critically, games with player bases that are large enough to ride out the wave of bad reviews through sheer numbers alone. For another example, let's take a look at The Outer Worlds 2. Once again echoing Obsidian and Microsoft's own narrative that the game had anything to do with Fallout New Vegas, this IGN First features interviews with creative director and Fallout co-creator Leonard Boyarsky. The following day, the same interviewer, Michael Hyam, posted his thoughts after getting another exclusive IGN First. In this video, he described it as seeing that vision of a, quote, second coming of New Vegas fully realized. In the final review by Dan Stapleton in late October, the game was widely praised for its improvements over the original, and although citing that it was a slog at times, concluded with an 8 out of 10, and, quote, that much closer to the Fallout New Vegas successor we thought it would be, end quote. Interesting, isn't it, that this is repeatedly mentioned, just as it was in the original game's marketing. Not only that, IGN has repeatedly mentioned it throughout their own videos, particularly the exclusive IGN First interviews and gameplay. Can you think of a single other game that has been repeatedly compared to an entirely different series made 15 years ago by a team of developers that have almost all since left the studio, and that this would continue into its sequel as well? By now you should be starting to get the picture. Perhaps you think I'm being harsh or singling out IGN in particular, but the reality is most of these outlets do it. I'm sure there are writers in every one of these that want to go to town on trash or praise something that might be widely hated, but if they want those exclusive interviews, the press previews behind closed doors, review codes, and so on, they cannot take the financial risk of rocking the boat. More to the point, whether consciously or not, free exclusive access or codes will predispose anyone to a more favorable review. It's human nature. This section was only meant to be brief, and now it's gone on longer than I'd planned, but hopefully the point is clear. Because games media relies heavily on ad revenue, they cannot take risks that would mean missing out on review codes or exclusives that will bring in more attention and foster goodwill with the very companies that provide these things. Anyway, I'm sick of talking about review codes now, and I'm sure you are too. Let's take a look at the general landscape instead. In June 2020, Jonathan Dornbrush, then editor at IGN, gave The Last of Us Part 2 a 10 out of 10, or masterpiece, rating, according to the outlet's review system, citing it as, quote, the culmination of everything that's made Naughty Dog's blockbuster storytelling so memorable since the original Uncharted on the PlayStation 3, one of the generation's best games, end quote. 2 years later, he revealed that he'd been hired by Sony and now works as the editorial content manager for Naughty Dog. He now writes articles for the same studio he gave a 10 out of 10 rating for their previous game. I could stop there, but let's continue. In June 2014, Kevin Van Ord gave Divinity Original Sin a 9 out of 10 in his review for GameSpot, and also awarded it the Game of the Month for July that year. A year later, he revealed that he was leaving GameSpot after he'd been hired on as a writer for MMO developer Treon Worlds. This venture apparently didn't last, and in May 2016, he was hired on as a writer for Larian Studios, where he has worked at since, including their major releases Divinity Original Sin 2 and Baldur's Gate 3, of which GameSpot awarded both games a 10 out of 10 rating. Alana Pierce is a US-based Australian games media personality and streamer that worked at IGN, Rooster Teeth, Funhouse, and Inside Gaming until October 2020. The following month, she announced she'd joined Sony Santa Monica Studios. Despite claiming that she has consulted on 3 games and written for 2 prior to this, I haven't been able to find any evidence of any previous writing credits, and these are the only ones publicly listed on IMDb after starting her work at Sony Santa Monica. Wikipedia links to this same article, so at the time of writing this, her claims to prior work is essentially hearsay. This is in addition to her voice acting credits in Gears of War 5, After Party, and Cyberpunk 2077 following her departure from IGN. There are no acting credits listed prior to this. Like her previous claims to consulting and or writing for 5 games, which there is currently no evidence of, she also claimed to have worked as a writer during her 4 years at the studio.
Hi, I'm Alana, and I'm a video game writer at Sony Santa Monica.
I went through this in the last video, but let's walk through the evidence once again. Alana claims that she was a writer at Sony Santa Monica, but not specifically on God of War Ragnarok.
I was hired as a writer at Sony, and that was what I did while I was there. I was a writer. There are certain things I can't say due to my very specific contract, but here is what I will say. I never claimed anywhere to be a writer on God of War Ragnarok. I claimed to be a writer at Santa Monica Studio, but they are accusing me of specifically lying about being a writer on God of War Ragnarok. Again, a thing I never said.
In her podcast, Play, Watch, Listen, number 119, specifically reviewing God of War Ragnarok's review scores, let's just ignore the staggering conflict of interest in just that alone. She says the following.
So I always feel like I have to give the context. I didn't work on this game a ton. I
was just about to say it, but then I stopped myself. I was going to ask.
Let's chuck some basic noise removal on it in Audacity and have another listen.
I was just about to say it, but then I stopped myself.
I have written on it.
Maybe that seems disingenuous or taking her out of context, so now let's play the rest of the clip.
I am allowed to say that I worked on the accessibility stuff, which I did. Like, I pitched and helped iterate some literal features of the game, some gameplay mechanics. For writing, I think I'm allowed to say.
There's at least
I'm not
one
allowed to
boy
say.
in
I'm not
there
allowed
that's
to
yours.
say what. I can say. I wrote some supportive content, and I'm not allowed to say what.
Quote, for writing, I'm not allowed to say what, end quote. If she wasn't a writer, why would she be saying this?
I can say. I wrote some. Supportive content, and I'm not allowed to say what. I never claimed anywhere to be a writer on God of War Ragnarok.
She is not listed in the credits as a game writer. This has been confirmed by another one of the actual game's writers, and she is rather listed as an accessibility consultant. She responded to this saying that she never claimed to be a writer, which has already been disproven, and then seems to try and imply that accessibility is the same as writing and design. Let's go back to her initial clip and her tweet here.
I never claimed anywhere to be a writer on God of War Ragnarok. I claim to be a writer at Santa Monica Studio, but they are accusing me of specifically lying about being a writer on God of War Ragnarok. Again, a thing I never said.
Now let's play the audio again.
I have written on it.
Oh dear. There is irrefutable evidence straight from her own mouth of claiming to be a writer, which she then edited out from the same debunk video you just saw, and then subsequent tweets of pretending to be a writer when she was actually just an accessibility consultant. There is nothing wrong with that position. All developers are worthy of respect, but not when they pretend to be something they're not. For the same reason I haven't worked at Blizzard, and why I'm not a co-founder of Rockstar Games. Whether she did, in fact, also spend her contract at Sony Santa Monica as a writer for other games is unclear, but her only other writing-specific credit she has in anything to do with God of War Ragnarok was a cookbook. At the time of writing this video, Alana Pierce does not have a single publicly available writing credit on any game to date. By now, the point should be clear. It is one thing for media personalities to move between outlets. This is not unheard of and, if anything, encouraged, given how tightly knit the media circuit is and moving in the same circles. It is another thing entirely to use your role as a games media personality or streamer or highbrow critic to strong-arm your way into the industry through connections, bias, and ultimately nepotism. Jonathan Dornbrush, Kevin Van Ord, and Alana Pierce are only a few examples of the cronyism that exists within games media, where personalities are awarded with developer or studio roles, while actual developers with real, tangible experience are not. This is not only blatantly corrupt, not only evidence of clear favoritism, it is an affront to the journalistic integrity which these bottom feeders pretend to uphold. What is particularly egregious about cases such as Alana Pierce is the astounding lack of oversight and failing to disclose an obvious conflict of interest. There is the previous example where she had her voice and likeness used in Cyberpunk 2077, given one of their branded chairs, and praised it in the lead up to release, but this is small change compared to her other behaviour. Even if I had not just provided irrefutable evidence of her claiming to be a writer on God of War Ragnarok and thus breaching her NDA at the time as a contractor, the fact she and many other media personalities and YouTubers are free to continue streaming and voice opinions about anything, let alone competitions or the games they're actively involved in, beggars belief. It is indicative of the deep corruption and fundamental lack of integrity that each of these people holds, and returning to my central thesis, what a fucking joke it is to claim that any of you are journalists. Games media is in bed with the industry and corporations, and to claim otherwise is nothing short of delusion. When I worked in the games industry, I was required to submit a conflict of interest form for anything I did that was game related. This included modding for Skyrim. It went to the studio's legal team and everything. When I was hired, I wasn't even allowed to continue an indie team that I just started with some friends at uni for some small projects to help build up our portfolios. That is how strict it is. This is not that surprising. Non-competitive agreements and ownership clauses around material produced while working at a studio isn't unheard of. There are similar examples in other industries. This kind of thing is why you'll see on developers' social media pages the disclaimer that all opinions are my own or something to that effect. Companies value optics highly and tightly control the behavior of their employees, at least in lower or less important positions. It's why I was personally so surprised that Alana Pierce and others of her contemporaries continue to, and are still allowed to this day, stream games, talk about what they're working on, endorse other games from other studios such as Xbox and Microsoft, and voice act or work in other projects at the same time. I can tell you, had I done this, or the thousands of no-name developers in the industry right now, we would face disciplinary action, likely subject to an investigation, or even fired. In the case where we produced a game or demo as part of this would be subject to heavy litigation, and if we were to resist, our employer would take us to court trying to get the rights to it. Why didn't this happen to Alana? Doubly so, considering she said she was a contractor, and that nervousness in the clip earlier was because she knew what she could or couldn't say depending on the non-disclosure agreement that she'd signed on joining Sony Santa Monica. Do you think any of us would be invited to early previews, get free codes, even get the chance to start our own podcast with other gaming orbiters, let alone get to 119 episodes of it? I'll tell you why. It's because she is a media personality and a streamer, not a journalist, and she was used for cynical PR purposes. Alana has since privated or deleted a lot of the videos where she talks about God of War or Sony Santa Monica, which has made it difficult to track down. Thankfully, and unfortunately for her, archives have made it difficult for her to control the narrative. Games media has become a platform to bypass the industry grind that the rest of us have to go through, much like QA positions used to be thought of, because why put the effort into actually getting experience in a role and work on games when you can just use your public reputation and industry connections to skip all that instead? It's all the more appalling that companies don't understand the optics of this. Even if it was all above board, and they weren't quite clearly engaging in nepotism, favoritism, and backroom deals with the very people that claim to hold them to account, the free PR and brand recognition is more important because everyone is either too stupid or unwilling to look close enough to question it. Oh yes, a second helping of influencer-approved slop, please. Jonathan Dornbrush, Kevin Van Ord, Alana Pierce, and all the others like them are no different to the YouTubers who strong-arm their way into acting roles. They do not have experience, they don't even really have talent. What they have is brand power, favors, and free PR. And in an industry that is as corrupt to its core as gaming is, that's all that really matters. While this video is meant to address industry practices and the endemic corruption within games media rather than targeting individuals per se, this is one case where the entire pretense of journalism, accurate reporting, any level of integrity, and above all, the truth completely falls apart. It is Jason Schreier, of all media personalities, that has been placed on a pedestal and believes he is some kind of bastion of truth and journalistic integrity. Allow me to show you that this is not the case. On June 24th, 2020, while writing for Bloomberg, Schreier, among many other journalists, reported on the allegations made against Chris Avellone as part of a Me Too-style reckoning within the games industry. He spends over half the article detailing the allegations by the multiple women, and the only mention of Avellone himself was that he declined multiple requests to comment. Whether these requests were actually made and Schreier attempted to get in contact with Avellone is unclear. This article was written only 4 days after the allegations were first made public on Twitter. Keep that in mind. Chris Avellone, in response to the blatantly false allegations, filed a libel lawsuit against the women, specifically Carissa Barrows and Kelly Ray Bristol, who made the initial allegations. The case concluded in March 2023, unequivocally in his favour, with the two women fully retracting their claims, issuing unequivocal apologies, and the settlement of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for damages to Avellone and his career. Schreier has not retracted or attempted to clarify his initial report that Avellone was part of a Me Too reckoning and, by implication, a sexual predator getting what he deserved. To this day, articles remain up that do not clarify or retract any of the allegations, such as this article by Sean Murray from The Gamer, which was written 2 days after the allegations and made no effort to contact Avellone for comment. The only source listed in this article is Twitter and Carissa Barrows herself. This fails in not only being objective, it is not even accurate reporting. Returning to Jason Schreier, when the culture at Blizzard was exposed, he admitted that he actually knew about the allegations for years, but didn't have enough to write an article. And yet, this is the same reporter that did exactly that in the case of Chris Avellone, with a few Twitter posts 4 days later. By 2024, clearly there was enough to warrant writing an entire book about Blizzard Entertainment, and yet I'll remind you that he has not issued an apology or retracted or clarified anything to do with Chris Avellone, just like the rest of the media outlets that reported on the unsubstantiated and categorically false allegations. That should speak for itself as the kind of reporter Schreier really is. I'm sure many of the women would have appreciated you reporting on Blizzard, but I guess the truth is only convenient for you, Jason, when it brings a lot of ad revenue to the site you're writing for and the press tour after writing a new book. Simply put, Jason Schreier is not an investigative journalist or a source of truth or even accurate in his reporting. He is a biased grifter that has built up enough of a reputation that people take his explicitly biased articles at face value and does not operate with any kind of integrity or objectivity that actual journalism demands. His big pieces, such as the expose on BioWare at the time of Anthem's development, highlight a pattern of this behaviour. First of all, the article is predicated almost entirely on the allegations of 19 anonymous employees, where, conveniently, there is no way to actually prove whether any of what they're saying is true, and much like the Avellone allegations, is little more than hearsay. Did someone actually go into a room and cry? Your guess is as good as mine. This is not running defense for BioWare. Clearly the studio and EA interference and the whole Anthem debacle was a gigantic shit show. This is specifically examining the nature of his reporting and how little solid evidence he can actually provide. Anyone can put quotation marks around any claim, and this gives reporters like Jason Schreier plausible deniability were it to come back and bite them on the proverbial arse, such as with Chris Avellone. The anonymity is understandable. If all 19 of these people are actually current or former BioWare employees at the time the article was written, they don't want to experience backlash or firing for speaking out. However, when the crux of an article is entirely based on evidence that cannot be proven or disproven either way, this is not solid reporting or representative of integrity. It's gossip. That is all that Jason Schreier does. Post gossip and reap the rewards as some kind of bastion of moral integrity that's holding the industry industry to account. Schreier is one of the many figures within games media that is incapable of separating his own personal beliefs and biases from actual objective journalism. An infamous example was the review of the PlayStation 5 by Ian Walker at Kotaku in November 2020. There should have been an evaluation of technical specifications and perhaps how it felt to play, but Walker then launched into a completely irrelevant breakdown about COVID-19, political violence, and a prevailing feeling of despair. What does this have to do with the PlayStation 5? That's an excellent question. Not only did he think this was worth writing in the first place, everyone at Kotaku thought it was okay to post. Games media is incapable of separating themselves and their own hubris in their reporting, and they fail at even the most basic journalistic standards because it is not objective. The reporting is designed solely to fit a narrative. I could keep going, such as the propaganda surrounding GamerGate that it was solely about harassing outspoken feminist women and not at all related to holding corrupt games media to account, but this should speak for itself. There are no game journalists. There are only company men and arrogant, self-important hacks. Finally, it's fitting that we end this video on what is the final form of games media and the face of everything wrong with it, Geoff Keighley.
This partnership and why I'm excited about it is that they're really adding value to the equation.
To quote Eurogamer's Robert Florence, Geoff Keighley is often described as an industry leader, a games expert. He is one of the most prominent games journalists in the world, and there he sits, right there, beside a table of snacks. He will be sitting there forever in our minds. That's what he is now, and in a sense, it is what he always was. As executive producer of the mindless, horrifying spectacle that is the Spike TV Game Awards, he oversees the delivery of a televisual table full of junk, an entire festival of cultural Doritos. This was in 2012, by the way. There couldn't be a more perfect image of the corruption and hypocrisy of games media. Florence's description captured the microcosm of games media over games journalism beautifully. But that's not all, because Keighley somehow managed to get worse. From sitting beside snacks and Halo 4 promotion, to hosting the Summer Games Fest for IGN, to the Game Awards each December, Keighley has, if anything, doubled down on this image. Florence may have been charitable in describing him as a journalist, but there is no journalism to be had, nor integrity or self-respect. Whenever Keighley invites his best friend Hideo Kojima up on stage, or cuts off award winners to move on to the next lot of commercials, you know that there is nothing left over. There is no integrity, no interest in truth, only profit and our friends and connections. There is no such thing as games journalism. Returning to the article from earlier, Florence elaborated further, quote, "The GMAs shouldn't exist. By rights, that room should be full of people who feel uncomfortable in each other's company. PR people should be looking at game journos and thinking, that person makes my job very challenging. Why are they all best buddies? What the hell is going on?" That's an excellent question. Forbes writer Eric Kane then expanded on this with an article from Gamasutra in 2007. Quote, "The games press is almost entirely dependent on access to information, people, and products that only game publishers can provide. You want the latest details on a game that's still a year away from release? What you get, when you get it, and who you get it from are ultimately decisions made by that game's marketers." An article from October 2012, before Gamergate, before Trump, before COVID, summed up everything you could possibly need to know about games media. Because returning to my central thesis, there is no journalism and there are no journalists. Assuming this video gets any attention, I'm sure the media personalities, streamers, and various other players who are morally bankrupt grifters will attempt to paint this video as malicious and that I'm some kind of alt-right, incel, sexist, transphobic, whatever pig that should be silenced. I eagerly await that response, because if games media has shown anything over the years, all it can do is double down even further. If you want things to change, let the ad revenue dry up and the great grift end along with it. Thanks for watching.